Hello and welcome to the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast. I'm your host, Joe Manganiello, and really excited to be debuting this new podcast platform. Basketball has been an incredible part of my life since childhood, and the last time I had a podcast 4 years ago, Suits and Sidelines, shout out to Arun Tatakara, AT, my co-host, one of my best friends. It was a great experience. We were able to, in just under a year, build an audience, specifically in the niche of sports law. It wasn't just about basketball. We talked a lot about collegiate athletics as that space was changing rapidly, day by day, week by week, month by month, while we were in law school together. And so that podcast was a great platform for us to talk about all these complex issues that we were studying while we were stuck in our bedrooms during the pandemic. And now I'm coming back onto the airwaves, if you're listening, into your ears. 4 years later, the profession of basketball, the business of basketball is larger than it's ever been. There's so many things to discuss. And really excited to be adding more of a balanced perspective in my coverage of men's basketball and women's basketball. And women's basketball has grown leaps and bounds from where things were in 2020 and 2021. In a moment, I'm going to go over my biography a little bit and talk about my experiences working in the WNBA. But just at a high level, really happy to be starting this platform, to be able to have conversations and go in depth on topics such as the transactions in the NBA and the WNBA, in the business of basketball, off the court, sponsorship, jersey patch, arena, ownership, transfers, expansion. I see this platform as being both an opportunity to time coverage and content at key moments in the calendar. And so you'll notice this first season of the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast is dedicated to recapping the free agency period for every WNBA team. We have 13 WNBA teams as of spring 2025. And they'll be competing this summer. I'm planning next to have a season 2 where I dedicate the coverage to off-season previews for the NBA, so ahead of both the NBA draft and NBA free agency, and of course, anticipating what trades and cap considerations are going to be going into all 30 teams in their planning. And then I'm anticipating weekly updates as well, where I'm able to move through a range of topics. But how about I properly introduce myself to those of you who don't know me? My basketball story begins on South Salina Street in the city of Syracuse as a youngin'. Until I was about 8 years old, I lived in the city of Syracuse, and my mom and dad moved us to the suburbs, so north of the city when I was 8. And so second grade through my senior year of high school, I went to Liverpool school districts. But my basketball story begins as a kid on the streets in the city, and humbly, with a Nerf hoop. I had a miniature Team USA basketball, and I would just stay out in the street shooting that mini ball at that mini hoop. Kids in the neighborhood would find their way over, pass the rock, shoot a little bit, maybe take that energy to the backyard for some sandbox action, jump on some swings, being a kid. And the city of Syracuse is a very diverse place. And these early experiences in my life, dovetailing with being in kindergarten and first grade, where, having white skin didn't mean that I was in the majority. In fact, there were many languages being spoken, racially diverse. And these things all connected for me. The basketball players I loved most didn't necessarily look like me, but their passion for the game and their ability, their talent is why I loved them and why I loved the game. And so from an early age, I knew there was this correlation between having a passion for life, having a passion for a game, having a passion for people, meant embracing diversity, learning new ways, discovering new ways to better yourself and better the people around you. And so these were fundamental moments in my life. And I directly associate basketball and falling in love with basketball in how my makeup evolved at a young age. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I went through Liverpool schools in upstate New York for most of my K through 12 and was very fortunate. Public school district that was at the time more than sufficiently funded. I grew up in a neighborhood that was as big as my bicycle and my legs could take me, and connected with other neighborhoods and led me to other friends. And I was able to play pickup basketball among other sports. Summers would just be roaming neighborhoods, finding the blacktop that everybody was going to that day. In 2003, I was able to have a really special experience as a young person. Our elementary school had a TV broadcast at that time, LBE TV. We would broadcast the news every morning for the school. Shout out to Thomas Bull, a really innovative, passionate educator in upstate New York. And I was one of 3 producers from my grade that year. So every morning we'd get up early. That may or may not have been when I started experimenting with coffee. I'm not sure. Getting up early, getting over there, working with whichever kids were rotating in that week as anchors. Sometimes I would be on the air. And that year up in Syracuse, our Division I basketball team, which is, like the pro team up there, especially at this time, Big East basketball is arguably at its peak, or at least it's, kind of a second wave. And that 2003 team had a freshman named Carmelo Anthony, a freshman named Jerry McNamara, had veteran players like Queth Duaney, Hakeem Warwick, Craig Forth. Craig Forth would go on actually to teach in our school district, lives up in upstate New York. And we got a chance to go to a training camp, or rather go to an open practice 3 weeks before the March Madness tournament. In February of 2003, there's little old me, little Joe Mags, and me and the other students had a chance to walk around, interview players. And we actually I'm sure if I reached out to my old school district, they have this archival somewhere. And I can't remember if it was me on the mic or if it was one of my classmates, but we actually got Queth Duaney on the record saying, we feel so good that we think we're going to win the championship. Syracuse was the 3 seed in their regional bracket that year. And they were not the favorite. Syracuse had never won the championship under Chip Boeheim, and they ran the table. 6 games in 3 weeks. And, that was what I like to say is that I'll never care about a single basketball team as much as I cared about that 2003 Syracuse team. And, that continued on for many years. To this day, I'll always have a soft spot for Syracuse because that's my hometown. I don't necessarily follow the team. I don't follow college basketball as closely as I once did. But that year and in those 5 to 10 years, sort of immediately before and in the years after, the way that I loved that program, loved the Big East Basketball Conference, followed those games, went out of my way to record games, watch them on delay, stay up late as a kid watching games. First thing I do on Saturday and Sunday morning, I'm watching ESPN, Sports Center for highlights, for analysis. And so as I'm getting older, as I'm getting closer to graduating high school, thinking about what I want to do in college, I was fortunate. I had a very well-rounded childhood. I was also in music circles, in theater. I would perform in open mics and coffee house formats, playing piano, singing with friends, jamming with bands. I loved acting, loved acting. And I also got to work for my student newspaper. Shout out to public schools, man. We got to protect them at all costs. This was so incredible for me. So incredible for me and all my classmates to have a public school experience where we could try anything we wanted, do anything we wanted. We got to protect the kids and make sure that this is something they always have. And so after trying so many things and really thinking about as best I can at 18 years old, what do I want to do professionally, or at least where do I want to get started? The skill set of writing, reporting, offering analysis, and how I could go into sports media and combine a few of my different talents. That was the pathway that seemed best for me. And so I went to SUNY Oswego, and right away, first semester, was able to work for the Oswegonian newspaper, WTOP 10 student-run TV station. There was a time, so I graduated in 2014. In 2015, there were only 4 student-run college TV stations in the country with HD equipment. 2 of them were Ivy League. One was Ithaca College in upstate New York with a great alumni base, and the other was Oswego. And so I'm very proud to be a Laker, an Oswego State Laker. In my years at Oswego, kept doing a diversity of extracurriculars, kept expanding on my skill set, well-rounding myself. And a real highlight for me was, Oswego is close to Canada. It's on Lake Ontario. Great hockey program, like one of the top Division III hockey programs in the country. At the time, their basketball program was not on the map as much. The SUNYAC Division III conference wasn't necessarily a strong conference or region for Division III basketball. But my sophomore year, I was able to start getting on the air, calling our men's basketball games and also offering some analysis in our women's basketball games. By my junior year, I'm calling play-by-play for the team. Senior year, I was also calling some games, although I spent my fall semester of senior year in New York City at an internship at Madison Square Garden. And I want to shout out head coach Jason Leone, who's still rocking and rolling as the Lakers head coach to this day. One of the best basketball coaches in the country. He was a revolution for this program with his intensity, his consistent ability to recruit very strong players, particularly has a knack, I think, for finding forward-sized players with a holistic approach to the game. Always has strong guard play, extensions of him onto the court. And we actually, Oswego hosted NCAA tournament games, Division III, during my time at the program calling the games. It was amazing. It was amazing to see this program go from, easily dismissible to the drama and the theater of postseason play in our building, in our house, expectations, and that was great. I mean, it was a really incredible experience to call those games. Shout out to Chad Burridge, Shawn Michael, Hayden Ward, Chris Gilks, my man Sunday. Shout out my man Sunday Bambosi. He and I actually linked up in New York not too long ago. Shout out to him. And after graduating from Oswego, I was fortunate during my time at Oswego to network with the editor-in-chief of the Watertown Daily Times. That's a daily newspaper. Now they're part of a larger, same company. They rebranded to NNY, Northern New York 360, but daily newspaper based out of Watertown, New York, close enough to Syracuse where they could cover Orange football, Orange basketball, but then they also had other regional levels of play, particularly, varsity sports, New York State level competitions at the high school level. And I was able to start on the copy desk, then within 6 months, move over to the sports desk, replacing a legend who was there for like 40 years. John Day was a sports writer there. Got to replace him covering SU football 2015, 16, 17. One of my favorite moments ever as a sports reporter was Dino Babers was the head coach of Syracuse, and they beat Clemson in the then Carrier Dome. It was an emotional day because Clemson was one of the best teams in the country. SU had been down for so many years, and then Syracuse was on top of the world, at least for one Saturday. Like I said, I got to cover New York State championships. I got to cover Central New York varsity sports. I got to go down to New York City. I would stay with friends instead of buying a hotel. And I covered both the 2017 and the 2018 ACC tournament, men's basketball. Jason Tatum was the best player in 2017. And then there was a really great Virginia Cavaliers team led by DeAndre Hunter, Ty Jerome in 2018. That was one of my favorite teams to watch play in person. And so I'm really proud of my early years as a sports writer, as someone who was going to games, writing on deadlines, creating relationships in the local and regional levels of New York State sports. But I wasn't done learning. I got the itch to go back to school. It was a time in the country, although I don't know that we've left that time, but it was a time in the country where I'm in my mid-20s and I'm asking myself, what can I do? What can I do to better myself, to make myself more prepared for the 21st century and all of the complexities and challenges that are going to come with that? And what really came to me was I wanted to be better equipped to understand contracts, understand the business and businesses that make up the sports industry. And so I went to Villanova, moved to Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, a city with a great basketball history. And Villanova was an outstanding experience, a whirlwind. I did not plan on there being a global pandemic halfway through. Unfortunately, too much of my time at Villanova was spent in my bedroom on those terms, but that gets me back to the suits and sidelines moment, because in February of 2020, my negotiation partner, AT, and I were finalists in the Tulane Pro Basketball Negotiation Competition, went down to New Orleans, rocked it. It was a debatable finish. I thought we should have gotten first place. Our opponents did well, and ultimately we got second place. And he and I were like, wow, all right, this summer, we're going to hit the road. We're going to go to this tournament. We're going to go to that conference. We're going to make sure that we're in the mix and ultimately getting in front of all these same judges that we just competed for. Because that's the thing about the Tulane comps, is that these are the premier sports negotiation competitions in the country. Football, baseball, and basketball. You get in front of experts. You get in front of officials. You get in front of executives. Little did we know that when we were celebrating on Bourbon Street that weekend, that we were swimming in the sea of COVID-19. And absolutely, I had gotten sick the month before, which in retrospect was definitely COVID. So I was probably immune to some extent. But little did we know that only a few weeks later, the whole world was going to shut down. And he and I were both scratching our head like, well, what can we do? We have all this expertise. We've invested all this time and money in the law school experience, and now we can't get in front of anybody. We can't go anywhere. And so we created Suits and Sidelines as, first and foremost, a refuge for sanity. But all joking aside, we had a lot of things to say, and we were able to connect with attorneys, sports professionals. We had Rick Barry, Basketball Hall of Famer Rick Barry, on the podcast. And it was a really awesome year. I'll be the first one to admit, it was sad when we shut it down. He and I both got jobs. I got hired by the corporate sales department of the New York Liberty. He got hired by Excel Sports Management, an agency that he still works for today. And so we decided to shut it down. If I could go back, I'll be honest, if I could go back, I would have found a way to keep it going, even if it was just me. But here we are 4 years later, and I'm finally honoring myself by getting this, getting a podcast platform back up, having an opportunity to talk to an audience, in the future, we'll have guests, and excited because there's so much to talk about with the sport of basketball, the industry of basketball. And I want to be somebody that people go, oh, you know what? I don't understand this issue. I'm going to listen to Joe talk about it. Or why did that trade happen? And unless we're talking about the Luka Doncic trade, I'll be able to provide a cogent response. Now, we're going to critique, but I also want people to come to me not because I'm going to have a hot take or I'm going to talk fast and loose on this or that. I want people to know that I have a perspective that is informed, but that I hopefully can encourage a creative, interesting discussion around what is a very challenging, very complex web of networks, interests. So many different parties come to the table whenever a trade or a big signing or a deal is on the table. And we're also going to talk hoop too. I love watching good hoop, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to break down who the best players in the league are, what teams are doing the best job of innovating styles of play. So this is going to be a one-stop shop for any basketball fan, anybody that wants to have the cool story or the cool anecdote or the cool talking point at the party when people start bringing up basketball and sports. I should say, though, my time with the New York Liberty was incredible. It was so exhilarating after the pandemic to help drive revenue, drive live events, getting people back into arenas and back supporting live basketball again after such a scary experience. In episode 2, I'm going to tell a story about the first time I went to a Liberty game at the Barclays Center. But on the flip side, one of the most proud moments of my life is the 2023 WNBA Finals. And even though the Liberty weren't able to close out that series with a win, over the course of 3 full years of hard work to see the Barclays Center filled to the brim, 19,000 people, the entire lighted up campaign, creating a true home court advantage in an NBA arena for a WNBA franchise, record-setting growth for the team in terms of ticket sales and revenue. And fans, when they were leaving the game and I was greeting them on their way out the door and watching people crying, holding each other up, arms around each other's shoulders, this Brooklyn-based fan base, this New York City fan base saying, hey, we'll be back. Hey, we're not going anywhere. This is the team I love. This is the sport I love. This is where all my friends come to have a great time and to spend time with each other. This is where my business takes its employees to thank them for their hard work. This is where a nonprofit is able to get the word out on a cause by buying a group package and then also bringing out some of their stakeholders. This is where girls basketball teams come and watch their idols. Boys basketball teams is where they come to watch their idols. So I'm really proud of that experience and being so close to the WNBA, but from the corporate side, from the business side, it was a crash course in a whole bunch of things for me. And I'm going to definitely be taking those perspectives into this podcast and into the future. And so now that I've had the chance to go over my bio, I just want to say at a high level, for me, I'm passionate about basketball because I'm passionate about people. This is a sport that is defined by the characters in the story. We watch basketball, we obsess over basketball because of the characters and because of the way that human beings in competitive, high-stakes environments, that competition and more importantly, that passion, it brings something out of them and out of each other in team settings. And I think it's so incredible and worthwhile to invest our time in celebrating strong team play, strong culture, development, the ability for one person to say, I am going to devote my life to this, watch me get better every year. And then when it comes to transactions, it's fascinating to see what one team values, how two teams think about a player the same and differently, and how coming to an agreement on a trade involves input from their representation. The timing is everything. Deadlines spur action. Shout out to Villanova Program Director Andrew Brandt. I want to make complex topics accessible, including pivotal language and subject matter from the collective bargaining agreements for both the NBA and the WNBA. And as we'll definitely talk more about, the WNBA is set to have a brand new collective bargaining agreement a year from now. Those negotiations are going to be tense. They're going to yield, almost certainly going to yield quite a bit of results for the player side. And so we're going to be talking about what that means, where things were, where things are going. The NBA just had a huge 11-year, $76 billion TV deal. Now, we can talk about that, but I also think it'll be important to look ahead to the future. What deliverables and what KPIs and measurements are going to be most vital over these 11 years to set up the NBA for another deal at that time? What TV partners will be at the table for that? What is television 11 years from now? All right, maybe we won't go that far. I'm not an expert in that. I have streaming accounts just like all you guys. I got no idea what 11 years from now will look like in that respect, but maybe we'll have some cool guests on in the future so we can talk about that stuff. All in all, I'm here to celebrate basketball. It is now more than ever a global sport with American roots. I'm going to say that again. It is a global sport. It belongs to the world. But the roots of basketball are American. And the way that us I'm an American, the way that us Americans embrace the future of basketball and embrace that it's not a sport that just belongs to us. Maybe it did in the past. Maybe it felt like that. Maybe we felt like we inherited a sport that was ours and ours alone. But as the sport gets more and more global, we have to invite spirited debate and discussion about the players and teams that inspire us, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that we share this game. We all belong to this game. Every nationality, every gender, it's our game to share and love. And so with that, I want to wrap up this intro episode by going over some key terms in the WNBA that's going to come up quite a bit in the next dozen episodes or so, and might as well cover that right here. So just to run through, and for those of you who are coming to this podcast from more of an NBA side of things, this might be a little shocking. So at the highest point in terms of salary, there is the supermax salary in the WNBA. Now, only certain players are entitled to a supermax. That salary is $249,244, just under $250,000. And that's about 17% of the salary cap in the WNBA. For this current offseason, the team salary cap, and it's a hard cap, by the way, you cannot go over it in the W. That salary cap is $1,463,200. So again, the highest salary that any one player in the W can make is only about 17% of that salary cap. And the W has 12 roster spots. If you want to think about it in these terms, each roster spot in the W is about $122,000, more or less. Now, there's also a max contract in the WNBA. And so the simplest way I could put this is that if a player is going to leave their team as a free agent, they're limited to signing the max salary with their new team, right? They can't get a super max unless they're signing it with the team that they were drafted to and that they've spent years of service with. So the max salary is only $214,466. That's about 14.5% of the team cap. So in real raw dollars, there's about a $35,000 difference in a season from a max salary to a super max salary. To be eligible for a super max, there's certain parameters, and really what, the key to understanding is that a player can get a supermax if they sign an extension to their rookie contract. So they never become a free agent, and they're signing an extension off of that rookie deal with the team that drafted them. Or I guess if you traded for another team's rookie, and then when they are ready to negotiate an extension, you're extending them a supermax. Now, if you hit free agency, if you played 5 or more years of service with that team, with that previous team, then you are also eligible for a supermax. And then the other way you can get a supermax is if you are given the core qualifying offer, core extension. And in a moment, we're going to go through a list of players that were given the core this year. And I think those examples will illuminate any other confusion. But just to round this out, the veteran minimum salary is $77,000, or about $77,000. Remember, I said a moment ago, the average roster spot's about 122,000. So if you're, a player later in their career, or maybe like a true blue role player, veteran minimum $77K. So you might take an $85,000 deal or a $90,000 deal, and your representation's happy because you get above that minimum. Meanwhile, the team is still getting, a relatively low salary. Now, contrast that with the first round rookie salaries. If you're one of the higher draft picks in the first round, it's going to be closer to a $79,000 salary this year, if you're the number 1 pick, for example. And that range goes all the way down to $72,000 in the bottom of the first round. And then there are not guaranteed salaries for second and third round picks. And so it'll be even lower than that. So if you could pay a veteran a minimum of about $77K, or have the number 1 overall pick and pay a future phenom star prospect about the same amount, that I think illuminates how valuable a rookie scale deal is. And that's not necessarily different or dramatically different from the NBA. But just to kind of run through, in the NBA, supermax salary is 35% of the salary cap. So if you're a supermax player in the NBA, you're making twice as much in proportion to the salary cap as what a supermax player in the W. And that is a byproduct of how much smaller the numbers are in the W, right? I mean, there's only so much team salary cap to go around. And I think for the WNBA union on the previous CBA, it was important to say, all right, we want our star players to get good money. I mean, $250,000 a year would make you pretty handsomely paid in the real world. And basketball is both the real world and not the real world. You feel me? So the max salary being about 14.5% of the team cap in the W. In the NBA, if you're a veteran max, it's 30%. And even the younger players, when they're coming off their rookie scale deal, they can sign a max that's 25%. And then with certain incentives, or if they qualify, they can actually get up to 30%. And then, the veteran minimum is a few $1 million. The rookie scale accounts for the number 1 overall pick, I think now makes something like $10 or $11 million a year. I'm not looking at my notes on that right now. So the money is a lot different, even proportional. So there will be lawyers and there will be discussions when it's time for a new collective bargaining agreement in the WNBA. These will not be the figures for much longer. All you have to do is see how Unrivaled has been able to change the game economically for women's basketball. Things are going to change in the W. Now, another concept that I want to discuss is protected or guaranteed contracts. And in my opinion, I think that the language here has gotten a little sloppy, because with an expansion draft for the Golden State Valkyries, protected players is a term of art where each team could only protect 6 players in that draft. But when we talk about guaranteed contracts, We're actually talking about, is the salary guaranteed if a player was injured, let's say. So I'll try my best when we're talking about expansion and the future of expansion. We're going to have Portland and Toronto coming to the WNBA next year. We got to talk about teams can only protect a certain number of players from the expansion draft. In the case of guaranteed money or not, so you're going to hear me in these recaps, you're going to hear me talk about how many guaranteed or protected contracts are on the cap sheet, on the roster for a team, in contrast to how many contracts are unprotected or unguaranteed. And that is a reflection of the fact that the WNBA, if you have not negotiated that guarantee and you get hurt, the team is not under the same obligation to pay out that salary. And in that way, it's more akin to the NFL, where unless you negotiate guaranteed money, teams can cut a player if they're hurt and they don't have to lose that cash. So again, this is another huge point of negotiation for WNBA players in the future. Hey, we want salaries to be guaranteed when the contract is signed. I mean, that would be a huge ask. It'd be a big change from what things are currently. Now, notably, a team can only have 6 guaranteed or protected contracts right now. But an exception that is really important is the 4th-year rookie option. So if you draft a player and she is doing really well and you want to keep her on the team long term, when they're going into their 4th year, that option that the team has, if you pick it up and say, yeah, we want her to come back for a 4th year, the 4th-year rookie option is fully protected. And so the team would not be penalized for drafting well. And I think that's really important. You don't want a team to essentially have to get rid of older players just to make room for their rookies. And you don't want them to trade rookies just because they're doing so well. Now, that 4th-year option is in contrast to the fact that rookie contracts are by default not protected. Players on their initial deals do not have guaranteed salaries. This also goes for most types of qualifying offers. So a qualifying offer is a minimum 1-year tender offer that a team will give to a player in order to satisfy a condition. So, for example, if a player just is coming off a rookie deal, they're going to be going into restricted free agency. That means that the team that drafted them can match a contract and make sure that they keep the player. But they only get that restricted right if they make a qualifying offer. If they don't make a 1-year qualifying offer at that at a minimum dollar amount, then the player is free to sign with whoever they want, unrestricted. So there's a little give and a little take. The team has to show a minimum commitment. The player then has to play within a certain guideline, unless they're just a veteran of a certain number of years and they've earned unrestricted free agency, in which case they can do whatever they want. And if you go to Spotrac right now, you'll see that there's a lot of women who are on training camp deals. I kind of like to think of them as invitations because they're unprotected deals. They're non-standard contracts. They do not mean 100% that player will be on the final roster. They just mean you're not going to go to anyone else's training camp. You're going to be with us. You're going to be trying out for our team. So that's again, unprotected, unguaranteed. And so the big picture thing is, if you're a veteran, and certainly if you're a star, you have more ability to negotiate terms. So if you're a veteran player set to become a free agent, your team might give you that core designation that we talked about earlier, might offer the max or the supermax salary to keep you. And of course, in most situations, veterans would be interested in negotiating not just guaranteed money, but guaranteed money over years so that they don't have to negotiate every single year. They can lock in a certain amount of money up front. But one big picture thing that I need you to understand is that with the looming specter of a new collective bargaining agreement, most players are signing 1-year deals this offseason. so that they can become free agents again in 2026 and hopefully sign for more money on friendlier terms for the players. So that's going to be a consistent theme. I'll just briefly go back. I don't know if I fleshed out everything on the core player designation rules. So a core player is given exclusive negotiating rights by their team. The designation comes with a 1-year fully guaranteed supermax contract. The player can sign the 1-year deal or negotiate a longer contract. The player can be cored a maximum of 3 times in her career. And if a core player has not signed, they must approve any trade involving them. So this will be something that we can go through real quick with real examples. So there were 6 players in 2025 that were given the core qualifying offer. Kelsey Mitchell for the Indiana Fever, she came back to Indiana and signed for that supermax, so over $249,000 for the year. But she didn't have to accept just that salary. That's just the most that she could accept. Why would a player take less? Well, let's look at Kelsey Plum. So Kelsey Plum, great player, won championships with the Aces. She and the Aces are at a point where, you know what, we want to see other people. We want to do new things. I'm ready for a new city. So Kelsey, she's given the core. Now the Aces start negotiating. They negotiate a trade with the LA Sparks. Kelsey approves of the deal, and the salary that she agrees to is $202,000. That's about $47,000 less than what she was entitled to. Why would she do that? Because the Sparks, their salary cap is a little bit more precarious. They wanted to keep some options open. They wanted more cash to be able to sign other players. And Kelsey says, you know what? I've made a good amount of money in my career. I'm going to take a pay cut. I'm going to give my new team a chance to use that money on some other players. Let's look at Satou Sabally and Alyssa Thomas. Satou, that has played her whole career in Dallas, she's entitled to the Supermax. Alyssa Thomas, similarly, coming off of her deal in Connecticut. Both those players get the core, but both of those players, one in the press, Satou, another behind the scenes says, you know what? I would actually prefer to get traded. Let's find me a new team. And so they both get traded to Phoenix. And they both agree to $215,000. And you'll hear me talk about this in the Phoenix episode, but that number is really creative and interesting to me because it's a lot lower than the Supermax salary, $215,000 versus $249,000. But the max salary is only $214,000. So by negotiating the $215,000, they're telegraphing to the world, hey, just so nobody gets it confused, we're Supermax players. We're taking a pay cut so that we can help our Phoenix Mercury team fill out the roster. We want to compete for a championship this year. So we want people to know that we're win first. We're trying to win the title this year, but don't get it twisted. We're not just max players, we're Supermax players. And I think that the visual, seeing that $215,000, again, really artful, because it sends that message on when we're ready to negotiate in 2026, we're going to negotiate as Supermax players. Gabby Williams, she's going to stay in Seattle. Seattle gave her the core. And at the time, the thought was like, wow, like Gabby Williams, she's an incredible role player, but not an all WNBA type player. Is Seattle going to pay her $249,000? They actually agreed to $225,000. And I think that was a pretty cool negotiation because Gabby is coming back to Seattle. This offseason, Seattle had to trade Jewel Lloyd. And so from a culture standpoint, there's a lot of value in continuity and keeping Gabby Williams as one of the faces of the franchise. Again, she's not the franchise player in terms of points per game or, she's not the flashiest talent, but Seattle wanted to do right by her and give her a salary commensurate with her leadership and her status. And I think $225,000 is a pretty good outcome for both player and team. And then the last example, which, actually could end up looking a lot like the Gabby Williams negotiation is Breanna Stewart. Now, Breanna Stewart is a Hall of Fame player, one of the best players in the world. But she got the court from the Liberty, but she has not signed a contract yet. She is letting things play out. She's letting general manager Jonathan Kolb make moves, explore trades and other signings. We're going to get closer and closer to the draft, where the Liberty have the number 7 pick. I don't think we'll see Breanna sign on the dotted line until much closer to training camp. Notably, her salary last year was $205,000. So she took less than the supermax last year. And I have a feeling it'll be like that again, depending on what the Liberty do. If the Liberty have extra cash and they want to give it to Stewie, arguably nobody deserves it more than Stewie. So these 6 examples actually really do a good job, I think, educating the WNBA fan on what is possible with the supermax. The NBA doesn't have a supermax. The supermax is closer to a franchise tag in the NFL. So this is a good opportunity to break that down nice and slow and make sure my listeners know what's going on with that, why some of these numbers look different, even though technically all 6 players were given the core qualifying offer. But I'm going to wrap things up for there. I'm so happy to have you as a subscriber to the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast. Please share with your friends, share on social media channels that you like. Let's get the conversation going. I'm so thrilled to be covering the sport I love, NBA, WNBA, drafts, trades, free agency. Let's bring it on. Let's make this a platform that celebrates the game, that is futuristic and visionary in how we think about where the sport is going, where we never forget that basketball is now a global sport, but it has American roots. There are stories to tell in our country and abroad. And let's embrace that. Let's embrace the diversity that makes this sport so great. Thanks for listening.